One of the major news stories that came out this past week was that the on-again, off-again marriage between Elon Musk and Twitter appears to have been resolved for now. It looks like Elon Musk is going to go ahead and make the purchase of the social media platform Twitter that he had originally said that he was going to. The event is sending shockwaves through the world and has been since it was first negotiated, since the importance of Twitter as a social media platform has kind of gone global. Good morning. My name is Dr. Sean Williams, and I am the lead professor of political science and the instructor for the senior seminar team here at Campbellsville University. I am joined today by four of our absolutely amazing guests who are members of the political science team. From top to bottom on my screen, we have Kylie, Savannah, Carly, and Luke. Good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing today?
Good. How about you?
Oh, I'm just fine. Another beautiful day in the Ville. So the topic of discussion today, actually, I guess we're really talking about two things and how they relate. We're here to talk about political divisions. And more importantly, I think we're trying to understand whether or not the rise of social media over the last 15 years or so has been responsible for the political divisions that currently exist in America. So in order for us to get started on this topic, I think, Carly, if you would, can you talk to us a little bit about this question of political divisions? Is America politically divided? Do you feel like America is more politically divided than it was in years past? What do you think?
America is definitely very politically divided, even though we have lots of different parties. Our two main parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, seem like they've really been drifting to opposite sides of the spectrum in the past 30 or so years. There's not really a whole lot of true moderates left on either side. And in fact, bipartisanship in Congress has actually dropped 30% in the last about 30 years, which is a pretty large percentage considering there's only a few hundred members.
We can't hear.
By bipartisanship, you're just talking about the number of votes that are crossing party lines, or are you talking about the number of non-two-party members? What are you referring to?
Yeah, so bipartisanship, like the number of, like you said, crossing party lines, willing to work with the other party. It's really gone away from them willing to work with each other on opposite sides to more of each issue like solely being thought of as purely Democrat or a purely Republican issue.
What about the rest of you guys? Do you feel like this political division, do you think it's permeating society as well? Is there any evidence for that, or is it just our politicians that are more divided?
I would say that certainly it seems very politically divided right now. But I don't know if you can see this graph right here. But it shows that our partisanship levels in the United States are just now in the 2010s. It's the latest it goes. They're just now getting back to the levels that they were in the 1950s and 60s. So in the 60s and 70s, partisanship was very low. There were moderate voters that would jump to one side or the other, swing voters. And before that, it was kind of like it is now. Like there's very strong partisanship. So it's not unusual. It's not something we haven't had before, but it's getting back to levels that it was previously. So, you know, it is what it is. It's certainly becoming more partisan and more divided, but it's not something that hasn't happened before.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you make. It's a little bit like talking about global warming, right? Like if partisanship was worse 10 years ago or 50 years ago than what it is now, it's difficult to attribute a modern phenomenon like social media. Although there's a lot of evidence that suggests that might be the case, that social media may somehow be responsible. So we're on, I guess, using a couple of social media platforms right now. So this is probably a little bit redundant for our viewers. But real quick, somebody want to take a shot at what exactly is social media? Like maybe Savannah, maybe you do this one. What do we mean when we say social media? How is social media different from other types of media?
I would say that social media is basically like any online platform that people can use to like share massive amounts of personal information like pictures and opinions and stuff like that.
Is social media different from traditional media outlets in important ways, or is it really just the same thing as the old newspapers of the past?
I think was that towards Savannah? Or?
No, anybody.
I think the biggest difference with social media and traditional media is social media is universally accessible and usable by anyone. Like users can be producers or consumers. You can get on there because you enjoy looking at other posts, or you can get on there because you want an outlet to express yourself. Whereas when you're consuming traditional media, it's not that you're necessarily part of every news crew or every journalism source. You're just a consumer. So social media provides a platform for you to have both roles.
Do you think? Oh, sorry, Luke. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's just the main difference is like you have interaction with people if it's news or something like that. I mean, obviously people can post normal things about their lives, but as far as news and politics is concerned, you have this interaction ability that you wouldn't have with typical media, and also the spread of news is much faster. In recent weeks, they on the news they showed that when the Queen's death was announced, it took 4 seconds for basically the whole entire world like to find out about it. And this was by social media. It wasn't from the BBC announcing it. It was from passage through Twitter, Facebook, all these things. It took 4 seconds for basically the entire world. So just the spread of information is a lot faster and people can interact with it easier.
Do you think that those are the reasons why social media has become so popular recently? Do you think it's more about the interconnectivity? Do you think it's more about the speed? Why do people in your generation like social media so much?
I think that's hard because social media accounts, like, that's a free platform, and it's basically, it can be available to anyone who has access to a computer or phone, or it's available on so many different devices. Whereas like traditional media sources, you have to pay for the paper, or you're paying for the television network to be able to watch the news. Like, there's a difference between who can necessarily like use and see the benefits of it versus, because I know that everybody basically watches the news, but it's not as much as social media is what I would argue, because anybody can use social media.
I think it's just the fact that this generation, under 30, we've grown up with the internet, we've grown up with phones. MySpace was 20 years ago, so it's possibly older than some of us. And I mean, 90% of people that use social media are under the age of 50. Over half of those people are under the age of 30. So I think it's really just such a generational cause because we've grown up with it. Like, people in this generation are the people who've developed social media from the very beginning. And so it's just much more common for the younger generation.
I'm in that weird in-between place. I remember MySpace existing. I don't know if I ever had a MySpace account. I might have created one just because other people were doing it, but it was a little bit late for me. I started college after MySpace was created, and so it really didn't get into it. But the way that you're describing it, okay, so we have these media platforms that anybody can access, that anybody can use, that anybody can share information. I remember in the early days of Twitter, we began the broadcast today by talking about Musk buying Twitter. I remember in the early days of Twitter seeing Ashton Kutcher at a talk, and he like picks up his cell phone, and he was an early investor in Twitter and considers himself to be one of the founders of Twitter because of the role that he played. And he was telling people, use this device, download this app, use it to change the world. This is the greatest power for democracy. Is that not the case? Shouldn't we think of social media as being this really positive force for democracy and information exchange? Is there a reason why, maybe Kylie, you take this one, is there a reason why this is wrong?
Yeah, in Luke's paper, he kind of talked about exactly the opposite of what I was saying, but I feel like in some instances, not necessarily all, but the exchange of ideas is how a government gets more and more opposition. It's not that everybody, like, being put on social media is kind of being put under like a magnifying glass. It's just like amplifying all of these different issues, and it's gaining support from more people. So it's like we might think, say Joe Biden says something that normally on traditional news media they probably wouldn't pick up, but then when you're having like millions of more people see this, it's something that they might pick up on. Like one person might notice it, and it might get more and more and more attention until it becomes like a bigger thing. So I think in some cases it encourages government opposition, and it also allows more sources to produce false stories too, because it's that's kind of what my paper was about, was false perceptions created by like news media. Because on social media, since there are more users and producers, so many people have access to produce false claims until it becomes like a snowball effect, like the Mandela effect, and more people start to believe something that's not necessarily true.
Luke, your name was invoked. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say that in democracy, the exchange of ideas is always good. There's lots of philosophy around letting good ideas, letting all ideas be heard, but the good ideas winning this like sort of cultural debate. Good ideas will trump bad ideas, basically. But I will say the problem with social media is that I don't think a lot of people are good at argumentation on social media. So the bad ideas don't always end up in the garbage can where they should be. So you do have this spread of bad ideas, I guess. So it is a problem, but overall, it's still good for democracy for people to have their voices heard. And to go off what Kylie was just saying, we do get to have more transparency with our politicians, because there are always things posted that the traditional medias probably don't have time to post every little thing. But with social media, they can add, oh, look at what this president said, or this governor, or whatever it is, that isn't technically like part of their formal duties. And we actually get to see that. So, overall, it's a decent thing for democracy.
Carly, you had mentioned a second ago, as you were kind of giving the rundown of demographics, that social media users trend younger. Now, Luke's argument, I think, if I understood it correctly, Luke, was that people who use social media aren't necessarily good at the art of argumentation or the art of listening. Do you think that that's because social media users are younger than the average population, or do you think that those two factors are unrelated?
I do think there is a correlation there. I know I read something about a study, and this study had mentioned that 57% of people who get their news from social media, and primarily from social media, have said that they are uneducated on politics. And so I feel like it's very easy to manipulate those kind of people. It doesn't matter if you're using facts or fake news, but people are going to be more inclined to believe you. And since most of us that use social media are in that younger type of generation, it's going to be mostly those younger people who are having their views manipulated.
That's an interesting argument. So the fact that I'm entering into a space that I don't have as much information as other users puts me at a disadvantage. Are there other examples of social media users that might be more powerful than others? Is it an equal landscape, or is there some voices speak more loudly and have more impact?
No, it's absolutely not equal. That was the main purpose of what I wrote about, was how the celebrity or the influencer view can impact so many people. Because when you've got somebody like LeBron James, who has 130 million followers, versus me, who maybe has like 400 followers, a lot more people are gonna see his posts. And because he is such a person of influence and high status, people are going to be more inclined to trust him and to believe him, even if what he's posting is just like absolutely undeniably false. So they're going to have a lot more pull in how people view, or well, they're going to have a lot more pull in how people's opinions can be shaped towards their opinions, if that makes sense.
Can I add something onto this?
Absolutely.
So I think one of the problems, and of course, yes, famous people do have an influence on this because, if they share one small thing, people believe it. And it's not necessarily an appeal to logic, but appeal to the fact that this person's famous. They obviously know what they're talking about. But a lot of the things on social media are basically like bite-sized pieces of information. You have like memes that people share that are political. So if someone shares this, it doesn't encapsulate the entire complexity of a political issue. And the same thing with videos. It may be a 10-second video that someone famous shares, and people immediately think, well, this is absolutely how it is because this famous person shared it. But the truth is, it doesn't bring forth all of the information that's actually required for anyone to make a logical decision from their social media feed. So I think that's the big problem. And it goes hand in hand with the people who share it that have this sort of credibility, even though they may not really have any knowledge about the issue, but people believe them anyway.
I agree, yeah.
Why then, if I have somebody who has no knowledge of the issue, you mentioned LeBron James, I don't think I would expect LeBron James to be an expert on really much of anything if I don't know him. I mean, maybe Shaquille O'Neal, he has a PhD at least. But why would I listen to individuals on social media if I don't have a reason to think that they're experts on what they're talking about?
I think people like to hear from people that they enjoy, or like that they like to see. Like people can follow people's ideas based off of their likeness. So, for example, Kanye West, we all know that he talks most of the time, pulls it out of thin air and has no idea what he's talking about. But people love Kanye West for the pure entertainment. That's where social media begins to like come farther and farther and farther from the truth, because people will falsely support things just based off of their likeness and making more money or making more people like them or gaining more followers. And that's where people start to kind of have the divide between the truth and what's on social media begins to widen.
And there's also the algorithms that you have to take into account. People with more followers and however like more like likes, comments, and shares that a post gets, the more likely people are to see it. So obviously people with more followers or their posts are more likely to get more of that stuff. So that means that more people are going to be able to see it, sometimes even including the people who aren't following them.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed actually, that I'm much more likely to get videos in my Twitter feed or post in my Twitter feed from someone who has 3 million views. I guess Facebook thinks that I should see more of that. So then, following up on that, you had talked about or have mentioned something about these ideas like of echo chambers. What exactly is an echo chamber, and how might it relate to this question of celebrities and social media?
Well, an echo chamber is basically, it's usually kind of like a group of people on social media, like say, a Facebook page or a Reddit page. And it's just when people who share the same ideology group together. It's kind of like, along with the old saying, birds of the feather flock together. And also people, they only want to hear what they want to hear. And so echo chambers is when all those people get together and they only share the same ideas. Like, for example, there used to be a Reddit page called The Donald, but then they got kicked off for being too violent. And so now they have their own website called patriots.win. It used to be called the Donald.win, but now it's called patriots.win. And it's basically just this pro-Trump echo chamber nonstop. They're very conservative. So they only share pro-Trump stuff. So they're not really being exposed to anything that would be anti-Trump. And whenever something anti-Trump is posted on there, they very quickly shut it down.
So it's basically that echo chambers are encouraging people to be closed-minded and kind of not even consider other viewpoints, which is the exact opposite of exchanging ideas and democracy.
This term, I don't know, I guess I haven't heard it as much in the last few years, but several years ago there was a big push in higher education to create these places called safe spaces. And the idea was that a person who has a belief that might be controversial needs to have a safe space where they can feel comfortable sharing that idea. And as a faculty member, I was told that my classrooms needed to be safe spaces for people to express their views. I even have disclaimer warnings in some of my classes when we're talking about things that are too controversial, because I've forgotten to take them out, know that nobody's talking about safe spaces. Are echo chambers really nothing more than just a safe space where like-minded people can come together and protect themselves from the outside world? Why is that such a problem? I was told it was a good thing.
Well, it's like what Kylie said, like basically people are becoming closed-minded, and I guess with your definition of safe space, they kind of are basically safe spaces for people's different opinions. But when I was younger, like that wasn't the definition of safe space that they gave me. What they gave me was that it was like for people of minority groups to like express themselves.
Well, I mean, I think Donald Trump supporters certainly consider themselves to be a minority group, although they're a minority group that also is the majority, which is complicated in and of itself. And one thing I guess to think about, so if I have a room full of experts, right? You go to a convention or something, and you have a room full of experts who are also highly knowledgeable in the field. I guess it makes sense that if we got them all together, they would say a lot of the same things and sound alike. These echo chambers, or maybe social media more broadly, is most of the information out there factual information that's being refereed by experts? Or is the problem in social media that it's just sometimes wrong? Kylie, what do you think?
Mostly wrong.
Mostly wrong.
I feel like we all opened our mouths at the same time. I feel like the biggest thing is when you're in an echo chamber, you don't have other people kind of refereeing the facts. Whereas I feel like if you're in a main space, where if you're in if you're on Twitter, you might be eaten alive if you post something that goes against what they say. But at least you have other people in the comments that are like, well, this isn't necessarily all true, and maybe you need to think about this. Whereas in an echo chamber, if you deep down dive to where you're so far in, you can't see other people's views, then you have nobody to stand up for what's actually true, or maybe have you consider something else as an option. So that's one of the biggest things about echo chambers, I would say.
I don't disagree. I acknowledge that there are echo chambers. I will push back on it a little bit because I think these have always existed. I mean, if you're having dinner with someone, lunch, with some social gathering, whatever it is, you kind of gauge your audience. You don't want to have an awkward dinner where you're talking about politics if not everyone's in agreement. So I think people have always done this on social media platforms such as Twitter or Facebook, where everyone can be on there. It's not so much specialized. I think Savannah was talking about certain smaller platforms where people specifically go there for that. You do have the ability for people to talk back or refute what people are saying. But a lot of times, even this is kind of not that great. People will attack your spelling. People, do these things, but they don't actually attack the overall arguments, which I think is sort of a problem. People get kind of petty on there, I guess you would say. So the echo chambers, they do exist, but I think they've always existed. And social media, it's not unique to social media, is what I'm trying to say. If you were in person and doing this, having debates or whatever, people are more likely to be respectful and actually go against your logic or whatever it is, and less of the brave sort of social media rudeness that people display. So there is still a difference, but I would say echo chambers have always been a thing, and political opinions, the way people gather or whatever.
I definitely don't want to deny that there are echo chambers, but I definitely agree with you, Luke. Echo chambers have always been a thing, whether it's a social media concept or if it's a concept that stemmed in real person interaction face to face that just got brought over to social media and amplified. Because like you said, there's things that you wouldn't talk about with certain people because of like opposition, and you kind of just don't want to press the buttons. But when you're so far in an echo chamber, it's kind of like there's just no limits. Like some of the things that Savannah mentioned in her paper that were from like echo chamber sites, which I have no knowledge of these. This is the first time even hearing of it. But some of the things that she mentioned in there, it was just stuff that you would never see on like a main platform like Twitter or even Instagram, Snapchat. Like people don't post stuff like that because they know it's gonna immediately been like, or lead to like an attack. Basically, you kind of censor yourself based off of who you're talking to, how many people can see it, and stuff like that.
Do you guys feel like social media is more confrontational than real life?
Absolutely. I don't want to like not give anybody else a chance to talk, but I would definitely say that social media provides a platform for people to hide behind the screen. It's what they call it. I think Drake had a quote in his song that was like, trigger fingers turn to Twitter fingers, where it's like when you're all talk in person, then you get online and you just start saying whatever you want to say because people can't reach through the screen, and so.
Yeah, the reason why I asked that question is because y'all have alluded to a couple of different times the idea that there's misinformation out there in social media because we have experts who aren't speaking, or the people who have the loudest voices aren't necessarily the most well known. And I can't help but wonder, is the source of this information, is it simply that I have ignorant people speaking? Is it that people are more willing to speak out loud things that they don't know about in social media because there's some anonymity? Do you think that there is, I've also heard a lot about the fake news over the last 5 or 6 years since the rise of the Trump administration. Is it that social media is a more accurate representation of the traditional fake news? Or are there people in social media who are actively trying to mislead their followers for some kind of political or personal agenda? Carly, what do you think?
I think that people who have large followings, they know that others who follow them and are fans take their opinions as fact. They know that. I don't think they really try to deny it. But of course, everyone has the right to voice their own opinion. And that's not the issue. The issue is that when people voice their own opinions, whether it's wrong or right, like everyone else has been saying, you're going to get attacked no matter what. And I think that's probably just one of the biggest issue that's leading towards a bigger divide, is just that lack of respect for other people's opinions, just attacking people personally rather than being willing to have a conversation about the different issues and sides of a topic. And I think that lack of respect is probably one of the biggest issues that is stemming from social media.
So for you, it's more a lack of respect. What about the rest of you guys? Do you think that there are intentional efforts to lie, deceive, and mislead on social media, or do you think those are overblown?
I think there are some, but I think some of the misinformation, people just put it out there on accident. But like what you're talking about is kind of like reminds me of Donald Trump and the big lie, which I used to think that like he knew that it wasn't actually stolen and he was just trying to get people to believe in what he was saying, so that way he could try to keep the presidency for himself. But now after like this lawsuit against CNN has been announced because he's now suing them over reporting on his election claims, now I think he might actually believe that his claims are true.
I think when you have political actors on Facebook, like or politicians even, if their goal is to get people elected, they're going to hope that people have their conclusion, and then they're going to give you news or facts or whatever that support what you already believe, just to get votes, to mobilize people. So, I think it is an issue, and on that front, but I don't think people find the facts and then draw conclusions. I think they have a conclusion. They find facts that support whatever they're predisposed to believe. And I think politicians take advantage of this on social media.
Luke, I think you're overestimating the maybe like the caliber of the people on social media, because in some instances it's not that they have a conclusion and they seek the facts. They seek information to find the conclusion. They're basing like political popularity of something, or who their favorite actor supports, to make their political decisions and their political like partisanship, like who they support.
Well, what I was trying to say is like people will already have a conclude, like they already have their opinions, they already have them formed, and I believe that some news outlets will try and find things that may not be true and release them just for like fuel to their fire. So they'll continue to be up in arms, they'll continue to mobilize and things like that in order to achieve political ends of getting someone elected like Donald Trump and things like that. No, I'm not giving them that.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with what you said. I guess I just had to hear it restated in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between like factual knowledge and ideological belief, right? Like, it seems that what y'all are suggesting is that a person who has a set of ideological beliefs seek out others who share those beliefs and are therefore more likely to believe the facts that they're providing, whether those facts are accurate or not. And if that's what's actually happening, then I could see how that could lead to a shaping of minds. At the same time, that if that's the truth, then people's ideologies are where we start at. To make the argument that echo chambers or social media are causing people's ideologies to shift, if their ideologies are what bring them to social media and govern their decisions in the first place, is social media the cause, or is it merely the effect of ideological change?
That's what I argued, that social media isn't causing this. Echo chambers, whatever you want to call it, aren't causing political polarization, political division. But people feel obligated to go on social media. They have a voice that as many people as they can muster to follow them will listen to. They have a voice and they want to use it. There's something called moral outrage I noted in my research. And this is where people see moral issues, like they deem political issues as moral issues. So they take to Twitter, Facebook, go on and on about all these things. They just, they have a voice. It emboldens people. But I don't think social media itself or the ability to be on social media is what polarizes people. People are already polarized. People already have these opinions, and they just use social media to put their opinions out there because they think the world wants to hear them.
I agree with what you said there. I feel like this is probably something that you never say in political science, but I believe like you can kind of meet in the middle and say that social media kind of amplifies political division. I wouldn't say people have always been divided. There's always been different things. It's just, I think, in my opinion, now we're seeing it because of 2020. It's COVID. It's the long, hot summer. It's all of that stuff is why we're seeing more political division now. Like, we're probably more politically divided post 2020 and like 2021, 2022, like these couple years leading past 2020. We're more divided now because people were sitting at home and all they had was social media. More people were consuming this and producing this, and people were just sitting at home hanging out like, what stories can I make up today? And I feel like that happened so often. And that is part of the reason that we're polarized. But like I said, it's not a new concept that we're politically divided. And it's not social media that has caused the political division. It just is amplifying and allowing more people to have access and fuel the political division.
Carly, what do you think? Do you think that social media is causing more division, or do you think that it is simply exposing divisions that are already existing?
I think it is both. I don't know. It's kind of it's a complicated question because I think that there's a lot of stuff that you're gonna see on social media that without it you would have never known about. There are so many things that would have never been as publicized if they weren't posted about on social media. But people have always obviously been divided. You know, we've always had differentiating opinions in politics. But I think it's both things. It's a cause and it's an effect. But like I think having differentiating opinions is a good thing, being on opposite sides. But where the issue comes is that when you solely just don't agree with people on the opposite side just because they're on the opposite side, it doesn't matter if their opinions are good, if they're not good. When you can't come to any logical conclusion just because someone has a different opinion than you, I think that's something that is growing because of social media.
Savannah, how about you? You want to weigh on it? Do you think that social media is causing division or simply exposing division?
I think it's doing both. Like, it's exposing the division that already existed, and in addition to that, it's creating even more.
So we're just about out of time. So for one final question, and I'm just going to go around the table and let each of you answer this. So because of this, at least perception that social media or social media outlets are driving some of the problems we have or making us more aware of those problems, a number of political groups or a number of politicians have actually been making calls to rein in social media or put controls on social media platforms. On the one hand, either shutting down extremist views, on the other hand, making sure that all views have equal access to platforms. So in the final minutes, just what do you guys think? Kylie, I'll start with you. Do you believe that social media needs to be reformed or regulated somehow? Or do you think that the best solution moving forward is to just allow the industry to self-regulate?
Yeah, I think that's that's one of those things that it's just hard to weigh because you can't really decide if it's better to limit expression or limit expression to the extent that it keeps everyone safe. It's kind of like when we learn in Western, it's like you have all the freedom you want until it starts hurting other people. And I wouldn't say that social media isn't regulated as is. I know Carly mentioned in her paper some of the things that were regulated, and it didn't seem to be much, but I know that there's certain stuff that you could post and it would be down within a couple minutes. And that stuff like that's regulation. And self-regulation, like if you post something that's disagreed with or just like irrational way out there, you'll be eaten alive. And I think that that's self-regulation as well. I don't think that social media needs to be privately regulated or governmentally regulated. I think that self-regulation is a perfect strategy to handle social media.
Savannah, what do you think? Should the industry be regulated externally or are internal regulations sufficient?
It is like a very difficult question to answer, especially like with people's jobs. Like by jobs, I mean the influencers. I think that there should be some outside regulation in order to avoid these extremist groups, because like a lot of recent riots, like back in 2020, like a lot of the BLM protests were peaceful, but then there were also some that were full-on riots, and those were organized online mostly, and the insurrection was also mostly organized on social media as well. So there definitely does need to be some sort of external regulation. But also that regulation makes it difficult on the people who make their money off of social media. Like, for example, if somebody is a YouTuber, they can't talk about Nazis because if YouTube's computer system picks up the word Nazi in a video, it will automatically flag it, and it will take away any sort of like ad monetization that the creator gets through YouTube, gets through Google. So that makes it more difficult for people to make their living. And there's like this whole like list of words that they have to try to avoid saying.
Carly, how about you? What do you think?
I do agree with what Kylie said. I think that the self-regulation that comes from social media is pretty effective now, especially now in the past like year, 2 years that we've seen like this cancel culture. You know, if somebody just posts something that is so out there and so disagreed with, it's going to get taken away. You're never going to see it again. Might not even see that person again. But everyone does have the right to be on social media and post what they want, as long as like it's not harassing or like threatening others. So like just throwing it out there, like the KKK has all the rights they want to make a social media page, but if they start posting things that are like KKK, like inline views, like harassing people of color, stuff like that, it's going to get taken down. But they have all the right they want to have that page. It's not going to get regulated unless they post things like that. So I think that internal regulation that Kylie was talking about is probably the best way to go.
Luke, we got about 2 minutes left. You get the final word.
Okay. I'm generally opposed to government regulation, things like this. I mean, you'll just have this false perception that the government's infringing on constitutional rights, when in reality, on social media platforms, constitutional rights are certainly a little different because they own the platform. They can regulate it how they want. So, you know, freedom of speech, things like this don't necessarily apply as strongly to social media platforms. So I don't think the government should regulate this. I think that would just lead to a whole slew of other problems. But I do think it's odd that of other leading democracies that I guarantee you have social media access, the U.S. is polarizing faster than any other, and some of them are actually going in the opposite trend of not polarizing. They're less polarized than they have ever been. So I don't know how you grapple with the fact that we do have social media, but why is the United States having this issue? So it really comes down to people just pointing out facts like, hey, this is wrong, and also internal regulation, the companies themselves also just bring down news stories and things that aren't actually true. And, you know, the echo chamber issue, you know, it is a problem, but nobody actually listens to those people. You know, moderate people realize that these are echo chambers. You know, it's a little eccentric, whatever you want to call it. So I don't think this is a problem that needs to be regulated per se. I think people generally have a sense of whether something is true or not, whether it's outlandish. So I really don't believe it needs to be regulated. These ideas what can be debated and spread and worked out by the people themselves.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that I share y'all's hope for humanity, but we're going to have to leave it at that. I want to thank each of you guys for joining us for this discussion. I feel like this has been a fantastic discussion. And for those of you who are watching, either whether you watched live or whether you're watching us later, please join us for our future broadcasts next week at this exact same time on these exact same locations. We're going to be discussing the impact of third parties on elections, specifically presidential elections, but we're going to be having this discussion as we're looking at the run-up to the upcoming midterms. So in the meantime, looking forward to seeing y'all later. Thank you and God bless.